Hi, I'm Brooklyn. I'm with Block Party Quilt Co. and today I'm going to show you how to make our turkey table runner. This is fun year round, but especially for November. You can make this little flock of turkeys for your table, and I'm going to show you how to do it the easiest way possible. This does come in a pattern. You can get the pattern on your own. It's super scrap friendly, which is always fun to kind of clear out some of those scraps and pick colors that you love. Or you can get it in a pre-cut kit. Now our kits are so fun because the fabric's pre-cut. You have your pattern, your backing, everything you need except for your thread, some of your other tools that I'll show you here, and batting. But other than that, all of the fabric is in there. So let's open this up and take a look. Super fun to pull out. So I am going to show you how to do the applique parts that make up the turkeys. Everything else we're going to kind of set aside for now. So I won't be needing these squares and I won't be needing the backing yet. So those are set aside. I will be using this template and my pattern. You will also need a small pair of scissors that you can use to cut out little shapes because while most of this is pre-cut, some of these smaller shapes you have to cut ourselves. And because of that, you need paper scissors as well to do your, to cut out these template shapes. Then you're, not burning through your fabric scissors. You might want a rotary cutter just to have around. You'll also need pins and matching thread colors. So once you have all of your things gathered, let's look at how to do the turkey applique. If you are very familiar with quilting, you will probably recognize that this is a partial Dresden plate, which is a really fun way to make little turkey feathers. And it is rounded, which is not super traditional for a Dresden plate, but neither is making a turkey. So let's take a look at what we need to do. First, we're going to need to cut out our template pieces. If you have ordered a pre-cut kit, you don't need to do anything with the feathers. We've got all of the feathers cut out and they have their notches already installed or in place. So you don't have to worry about cutting these. These other pieces we will need to cut. Each one is labeled for how many of each you need. And I'm cutting right down the center of the black line. But because this isn't something that's pieced, it doesn't have to be super precise, and that's always nice. Then you can take your fabrics here and we are going to make the shapes. And I've shown these on some of my other videos. It's a heat erasable friction pen with a felt tip. I love them. And I know there's some opinions out there about using them, but for this kind of thing, it's perfect. So I'm going to trace my shape. You definitely want something that can disappear when you're done. So whether that's chalk, another kind of fabric marker, or these, you can even use a fine pencil and cut on the inside of your shape. Whatever it is, make sure that you can see it and then that it will go away. And this orange on the brown is kind of harder to see. So I'm going to go on the back of this fabric. And for who knows why cutting out round shapes with the rotary cutter makes me nervous, but I'm going to give myself a rough shape of each one and then I'll go in with scissors and cut it out in detail. When you're doing applique, you are going to see all of the fabric that you cut. So it's really important that you have a clean cut so that it looks nice on your finished project, where when we're doing piecing, the inside of this is going to be hidden. So whatever it takes for you to get the cleanest cut, whether it's using these little scissors, like what I'm using, or larger ones, whatever's most comfortable for you is going to be the best choice. Then I will cut out these other two body pieces too. Next, I'm going with the yellow. I'm going to trace beaks and feet on the yellow. So I want to be conservative in how much fabric I'm using. The kit includes 2 of these squares, but you need 3 beaks and 6 feet. So you just want to make sure that you're getting everything you need out of this. The beak's nice that it has all of these straight edges because you can piggyback off of straight edges that are already there. And it'll save you a minute on cutting. Once you have your beaks traced, let's do all 6 feet. So the reason we couldn't send these pieces pre-cut is if they are already cut out and we package them, they tend to fray when they rub against the other fabrics. And when they're so small, you're going to use them for applique. Fraying does not make a good finished table runner. Cutting these out is pretty simple because there's only a few pieces, and it's kind of relaxing to do this little job of cutting them out. Once your feet and beaks are cut out, we're gonna move to the eyes, and this one is a little different. So instead of appliquing a tiny, tiny piece on for the center of the eyes on the black spot, we are gonna do stitching over that. So a lot of you know I'm also a hand embroidery pattern designer. Super fun little thing, and we're gonna incorporate some of that here into this. So instead of cutting out this piece, trace all three, and I'm gonna show you how to stitch this. So you're gonna take your black embroidery floss and pull off 3 strands. If you don't have embroidery floss, you can use any kind of thread and just get 3 strands of it. This comes like this so that you can change the thickness that you want for your embroidery project. But this, a single strand is about the same weight as a normal quilting thread. If this seems too intimidating to do the embroidery for it, you can always just get a marker and do a black line, but the ink will tend to bleed through and kind of have like a soft edge. So keep that in mind if you're planning on doing that. I embroidered the eyes on this little turkey, and you can see that the eyes are sort of tucked under the beak. So we're gonna make the stitches go almost all the way down to the edge of the eye. And then when we cut it, it's gonna be tucked behind the beak, so we can make sure that we're getting the line of the eye down at the bottom. Now you can freehand this, or you can draw a line where you are gonna stitch the eyes. If you have an embroidery hoop handy, this can also be helpful to keep your fabric still. And I don't want my black thread to be visible from the front. So instead of jumping across from, let's look at the back. So instead of jumping straight across to the other eye, I brought my thread down and made a little stitch because, like I said, that's gonna be covered up with the beak. And then we'll start stitching the next eye shape. If you are new to applique, this might feel a little overwhelming, but I promise it's not as hard as you may think. This is a perfect introduction to applique because the shapes are pretty simple, and you start with the feathers and then move into the detail on the face of the turkey. And if the eyes are too much, you don't want to do all the feet and everything, leaving just the turkey body also works. And you'll still get the same essence on your finished table runner. And then once you have it stitched, you're gonna do your other 2. Since I'm only demonstrating one turkey, I'm just doing this single one here. I'm gonna tuck my threads beneath. I did not just stitch it through the fabric. I just have this wrapped under the other threads. And then I'm gonna tie just a simple knot up here. Now you have your turkey eyes finished. When you go to cut these out, make sure that you are not cutting over your stitches. The bottom edge can go down as far as you need it to keep that from happening. Okay, now all of my applique shapes are cut out, and I'm gonna move to making the background piece. Your kit comes with a piece of this pretty fabric, and this is not the center of your table runner because we have the squares that go in between. So you are actually gonna cut off a rectangle here that will be used for the background of your turkeys. Right now I'm just trimming off this selvage, and this selvage is really forgiving because it's not very visible, but I trim that off, and then I'm gonna cut it to, as the pattern specifies, 12.5. Then mine got a little wrinkled in transit, so I'm gonna go iron this, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to find the center. Now that I have this all tidy, I am gonna find the center of the fabric by putting little creases in it. So I will come back and iron it again, but this is gonna help me know how to place my turkey. Now we know this dot is the very center of my rectangle. Now we need to lay out our feathers so that we can have them ready to sew together. In this colorway that's the reds and browns, you have 4 different feather colors. In the other colorway that has pinks and oranges, there are 6 different feather colors. So you just pick your favorite layout, and there are extra pieces, so you can pick it to be however you prefer. You need 11 feathers for this first turkey. Well, for all the turkeys, but start with 11 on one of them and we'll make the layout. And I am just totally making this up. I'm not following any pattern. I'm just doing what I think looks good next to each other. Now here's the fun part. So we have our 11 feathers lined up, and these little notches are gonna make this so much easier. And because these are solids, there's no front and back, so you don't have to worry about that right now. I am going to line up these notches and sew along the line to sew them together. I recommend starting down here at the bottom and sewing your 1/4 inch seam allowance from here out. And that's gonna help you keep this shape up here at the top consistent, because there's no 1/4 inch here. The seam tapers off naturally with the circle. And if you start up here, it's kind of hard to know where exactly to start. So I've shown in other videos that I like to start with a leader fabric underneath my presser foot so that I don't get weird threads hanging off the edges. So this is what I meant about the seam tapering off. You can see this is no longer a 1/4 inch away from the edge, but it's a consistent seam across. So when we open it up, because of those handy little notches, it's perfectly lined up, and we are gonna press all of our seams open. So then you take your next feather and repeat the same thing. When you get to the end of sewing your feathers up here at the round, I normally don't backstitch in quilting because I want to reduce the bulk in my seams, but this is a good time to do a little backstitch. So now I'm going to take this to the iron and I'm going to press open the seams. Now that we have this all pressed, I think this is so fun because you still have the look of the curves because of the seams, but they're all like the mixed colors now. I don't know, I think that's super fun. So we're gonna take this, and the center of the eyes is actually the center of this feather set too. So I'm making sure that this one is still pointing down at that center dot. Then I'm looking at my line that I've creased into the fabric and making sure that it starts right here on these feathers. Then I'm gonna pin this in place, and I'm gonna pin quite a bit. If you have resources to make applique easier, you can get things that are like a heat and bond thing that you iron on the back and it makes it stick to itself. That's nice because you don't have to do all the pinning. It's pushed in place and you just have to sew over the top. If you don't have any of those handy, pinning works just fine. You just want to make sure that you have enough pins in that your fabric isn't going to slide as you start stitching. And as far as picking a thread color goes, if you were to match your thread color on every single feather, it would be such a pain because you'd have to start and stop every 2 inches. So I'm picking sort of a neutral color. It's a light brown, and I'm going to go all the way around the edge of these feathers. When you're doing applique, you want to keep the edges of your fabric from fraying as much as possible. So doing a straight stitch doesn't work for that super well. So my favorite is called a blanket stitch. If you're doing applique by hand, this is really fun. If you want to do it on machine, this is how it looks when it's done. So it has this cute little stitch around the outside and it goes in a little bit. If your machine doesn't have this, you can use a zigzag stitch or anything that kind of overlaps. This one is not shown on my little chart of special stitches, but if you look up the machine model, sometimes they have more built in that aren't shown on the easy programming like 9-button thing on the side. So look up your machine model and see if you do have this stitch because it looks really good when it's done. Now until I get the feel for it, I am going to start on this edge. This edge needs to be folded under like this. If you take it to the iron and do that, that's a little easier. So I'm going to start stitching down this folded edge until I get a feel for where my needle hits on the stitch and make sure I like the length. because it's a little easier to make those adjustments on the straight edge versus on the curved edges. And I have my needle set to land down. So every time I stop sewing, my needle is held in place. And that is really, really good for applique because your needle won't be sliding all over the place when you move. When we're doing these round edges, we're moving a lot. So I lift up my presser foot a little bit and I just make those tiny adjustments as I go. Okay, now I have stitched all the way around this edge. I'm going to pull out some of these pins, and you technically don't have to stitch in this because it's going to be covered with the turkey body, but I want to make sure that it's tamped down and close to the fabric so it doesn't mess me up later. Because the blanket stitch does take some time, I'm going to switch over to a straight stitch for this and just go right on the inside of the feathers. Now I have my turkey feathers all done. I am probably going to come back in here with some tweezers and sharp scissors to cut all of these little extra threads that are hanging around here. Now I'm going to place my turkey body in the middle of these feathers. So I'm just finding the center so that I can make sure it lines up here. And I am covering the center of these feathers, the little circle that I just stitched. I'm lining up my crease line with this center burgundy feather, and then I'm kind of just eyeballing where the center of, or where the middle of the potato shape is, and that's where I'm going to stitch the body. The feet here are actually going to be tucked in beneath the body of the turkey. You want that little raw edge tucked down. But since I have brown thread on and I don't want to change it back and forth 100 times, I am going to just stitch with a little straight stitch across the top of the turkey feet so that they are held in place and I can go around the turkey body with the brown thread. Okay, now I'm going to switch back over to a blanket stitch and go around the outside of the turkey body. If you want the most subtle start and stop point, don't start your stitch up here in the feathers, start it down here next to your background fabric, and that's going to be more subtle if you have overlapping stitches because it won't be against the dark of the feathers. And then, like I said before, I am going to go in with tweezers to kind of hold up these threads and trim them. Or if you have really tiny little scissors, you can trim them like this. If it doesn't bug you, then you can just leave them there where they're at. Then I am going to take some white thread and we're going to stitch in the eyes. So I have these set in place. This is where I'm going to want them. And I'm going to stitch around with a blanket stitch. I'm going to make the stitch a little bit smaller so that I can get around all these shapes a little easier. I'm starting down here on the bottom straight line of the eyes, kind of like I did up here on the feathers, so that I can get used to my stitch length, make sure I like it for the size of thing I'm working on. Made it actually a lot smaller. And then for me, it's kind of like a warm up for when I'm getting ready to go around the round pieces. Now I have my little eyes done, and I'm going to switch over to yellow fabrics. You can still see a little hint of orange on this outline, and it's just because I haven't ironed off the stencil yet. So I'm going to switch over to yellow thread so I can do the feet and the beaks. Next, I'm going to take my beak and I'm going to make sure that it's covered just a little bit over that so we can't see that bottom line. If you want it higher, or whatever works for you on this one is good. Just want to make sure the bottom of the eyes is covered up. And the beak has no hidden edge, so wherever you start, you're going to have a little bit of overlapping stitches, and that's fine. You've already practiced enough of how to do the other ones that it should be good to go. Because this one's at the top and there's no like backup for where the stitches are covered by something else, I am going to tie these two threads here in a little knot just to make sure they don't get unraveled. We're going to come down here and stitch around the feet, and that will be the last step of sewing this turkey together. All right, and there you have your applique turkey. Now the rest of the pattern is pretty straightforward. If you were able to do this, you can definitely sew the squares together. You are gonna make 3 of these, and then you'll be ready to make the rest of your table runner.